Live, bro?
Live.
Awesome.
Oh, we got a little thumbs up. Give us a thumbs up if you hear us.
Howdy.
If our audio is audible, let us know what you're drinking. It's happy hour. Did you miss the pod shop, boss man?
I dream about the Podshop.
Are we online? We live?
We're good.
All right, we are going to get started in just a few minutes. Today's topic is one of our all-time favorites, the 1,000-day principle. But I think first we have to talk about what we're drinking because it is happy hour. And I want to show off a little product. I think this is pronounced Noon. And they're electrolyte tabs. And we've been talking about this whole concept of like 5 years ago, whatever, we drive around and be like, make water great again. And these tabs did it, and they're expensive as hell. Wait, hold up. It's really expensive. They're so expensive, but I use the crap out of them because, I don't know, it makes water fun. A lot of people, a lot of listeners of this pod have been writing to me asking me about cycling because they know we're big cyclists. Ian got me in to the two-wheel tribe, so to speak.
Two-wheel tribe.
And it's getting really popular now in the lockdown because people are doing Peloton. People are doing Zwift and Trainer Road and stuff on their smart trainers inside. And it's cool that like cycling is having this sort of like zombie renaissance while other sports are getting shut down. People say, hey, I can still go for a bike ride. In fact, I'm doing a little hydrating right now because this evening I'm going for a bike ride. So cheers to you.
Cheers, buddy.
Cheers to you guys.
Yeah, these tabs are amazing because they're super expensive and lightweight, cheap to ship.
Yeah.
Like if I was going to start a business, it'd be a tab business.
I mean, it's like a shoebox of like $60 worth of water supplement. I mean, crazy.
It's
right?
crazy, but it tastes delicious. I'd break my tabs in half because I find sometimes it's just a little bit. It's too much, too expensive. I know how much this costs. Even though you bought those tabs, I'll break it in half.
Something you learn as a cyclist, and I don't know if I know a lot of runners get into this, but with cycling, you're on the bike often for hours and hours at a time. That there can be a point at which water has reverse effect on your hydration, so it actually starts to dehydrate you. And if you're not hip to the whole electrolyte game, or putting salt in your water or whatever, or drinking Gatorade or something like that, you can actually start to flush the electrolytes out of your system, and it can be a nasty, nasty experience. In fact, on the hardest first big bike ride I ever did, no one got me hip to this stuff, and it was a hot day in Catalonia.
Yeah,
and we were going the whole way from Barcelona to Girona, climbing these big mountains, and I just started pounding water because I was like, man, I'm gonna die out here. I gotta drink more. And
guess what? You don't get hydrated if you're pounding water like that.
It was not a good situation at all. And so now I'm spending $60 on water supplements.
These are called Noon, N-U-U-N. Eric asked about that. Awesome. Meatco is drinking a Blue Moon.
Oh, nice.
Mike Stankovich, I think, is drinking a box wine. Awesome.
Yeah, dude. I've been drinking box wine and the Modelo's.
Yeah.
Got it. Cases of Modelo's. Normally you have little artisanal beers and stuff. Now it's like this box
Modelo.
Wine. All right, guys. This is going to be the first installment of something we're going to call 1,000-Day Friday. Ian and I...
You're not going to mention this?
Oh, I'm sorry.
I mean, it's as big as day. How can he not?
Sorry. Go for it, man.
All right. This is my new Podshop shirt.
Ian has a wardrobe now. We're just really bringing things to the next level.
My mom made this. Thanks, Mom. I appreciate it. And look what she put on the sleeve. I don't know if you can see this.
Hashtag WFA.
I didn't even tell her to do this stuff. It just showed up in the mail. WFA.
She's paying attention. We WFA-ing out there. All right. Yeah, one of the things that's happened in part due to the lockdown and in part maybe due to this pod shop is that we have received so many heartwarming emails from you guys and a lot from listeners that have been listening since the early days that we have never heard from, we had never met, we had never saw on the Twitters in the DC at a DC event, in a podcast comment. And people have been coming out of the woodwork to say things like, what up? Hey, if you're in my area, come to my house, I'll cook you dinner. Here's some free stuff from my company. Like these amazing heartfelt emails. So shout out. We really appreciate that. But one of the themes that I brought up in the conversations we've been talking about is a lot of people have been sharing their 1,000-day journey. So people will say things like, hey, I'm on day whatever.
Mm-hmm.
My business just reached $100,000 a month. My business just reached $20,000 a month. I've been listening to the pod since 2012. Thanks a lot, kind of thing. And it got our minds stewing about this 1,000-day principle idea. And so we want to talk about that today with you guys. So maybe that you could add a little bit of nuance or your experience to the 1,000-day principle to flesh it out. And then every Friday here for the next few weeks, we can post case studies on the TMBA blog. So we have a form below the YouTube channel. If the 1,000-day principle resonates with you, regardless of whether you're past 1,000 days or pre 1,000 days, perhaps we could use some of your thoughts or insights or even your company story. Or if you want to link Sipu from the Tropical MBA, we got some link domain authority. We can link over to your business and let other entrepreneurs be inspired by the journey that you're on.
What the hell is the 1,000-day principle for people that don't know?
All right, I'll tell the story. So in 2012, Boss Man and I rented a villa in Bali. And it was $17,000 a year, but you would always inflate the number to $25,000 a year.
This is the real story of what happens. I inflate the number to 25. Dan says it was 17.
If it's an expense, you inflate it. And if it's a sales figure, I inflate it. That's how it goes.
The reality, though, and you're going to tell the story, the reality is we were just getting started with our product business. I mean, we're like 3 or 4 years in. Like things were starting to really go well.
1,000 days, more or less.
Yeah, we had crossed over $1 million in revenue. I remember that, and it was the first time that I felt like we were really starting to make money. Yeah. And then you came to me and you're like, "Hey, how about we just like run a big house in Bali?" And I was like, "Oh man, I knew this was going to happen."
To hitch my wagon to. This is such an idiotic idea.
I knew this was going to happen. I knew he was going to try and spend it like this.
Don't judge. But so anyway. Fast forward a few months, Boss Man sends the check. We are sitting in this villa in Bali, and a good friend of ours, David McKeegan, comes over to a pool party. And he brings this cool Balinese wood carving that says Tropical MBA on it. These were the days, I'll tell you what. Anywho, we're hanging out at the party, and it's like the people at the party are just so unique and amazing. Like everybody's got that kind of story that you find in places like this live chat and in the DC where it's like, whoa, they do what for a living? And they have a store that sells what? And they can travel anywhere and they're not on vacation. They're just sort of hanging out in Bali. And then next month they're going to go to Europe and stuff. And for me, this was like, had you told me I was going to be at this party just a few months before or just a few years before, I would have freaking passed out.
Mm-hmm.
I would have passed out. Like I could not believe that this was possible, and that excitement, I think, showed on the podcast in those early days. So anyway, David, a little bit wiser, more experienced, I was talking with them and I was like, why aren't there more people here? Like the benefits of this entrepreneurship path seem so clear to me that why are there only 20 of us here at this pool party? Where's the rest of us,
Mm-hmm.
And he said, I've been cooking around a little idea. And I got to call David to really dig into this. But he said, look, I think you're going to have to be poorer for 1,000 days in order to make money on your own terms. That's from an asset that you own. Now, these are pretty big words coming from a guy who used to work at a bank in London. So when he took a step back for his 1,000 days, he was taking a bigger downshift than guys like me and you who weren't making nearly as much as guys like David were making. But I walked away from that thinking I was just past my 1,000 days, and I started to see the pattern over and over and over again. So just a few weeks later, I was sitting in a cafe in Bali and I kind of typed out this thing called the 1,000-day principle. And it has 4 segments. So it has the yearning, which are all the days before your 1,000 days. This is before you start your own business. And for some people, it can be 20 years. For some people some people, it can be no time at all. Then you have the great hope, which is sort of when you first make day one, that sale from a business that you own. The middle part is called the grind. This is, I think a lot of people can relate to as the dip, Seth Godin's dip, where you start making sales at the beginning and then it's like, oh, all this money that I just made, now I got to like invest it in my business. So I don't get to make any of it. And like, I don't really know if I'm doing the right thing and how am I ever going to get out of this? And then year number 3 is what we call the sunrise, which is where things start to go well. You start to get a little automation going, maybe a few employees, and all of a sudden, wow, like things are tough and I have new stresses in life, but I'm making what I made before and I'm making it on my own terms. And next time there's a pool party in Bali, I just might go there. So that's basically the 1,000-day principle. We put this blog up on the website back in 2012, and by far it has been the most popular thing we've ever really mentioned. The problem, I think, a bit is it's a retrospective article. So entrepreneurs like yourselves, you go through the 1,000-day principle and you look back and you say, man, that was tough in those ways. I did make those mistakes. I did screw up in those common ways, but I got through it. So what we're going to try to do here today is to look at some prospective things. Like, now that we've seen this pattern time and time again, what might it inform us to do? What might it help us to inform those who want to be inspired by our stories? We all know people that are thinking about becoming entrepreneurs, and we think this 1,000 days can be a big, big thing.
I just want to add a little bit of definition there, because over the years we've kind of tried to define this as something that works, right? As a formula that you can follow. And the idea, just worth clarifying, Dan, I think, is that day number 1 is the first day that you make your sale, like your first sale doing whatever you're doing. And then day 1,000 is you replacing your professional income with your personal income from the business, basically. So like you said, for us, it was easier than somebody like David because we weren't making a lot. But for most people, if you're making a lot or a little bit, it takes 1,000 days to replace that income.
Yeah, and there are a lot of subtleties and complexities, but one that commonly comes up when you talk about this sort of path or whatever is, well, what if I start a new business, or what if I switch it? And typically the 1,000-day principle refers to you starting like one brand, one business, and you iterating on that. You stay focused. There are parlays that can be quite efficient that can happen, but often we do see people, depending on the decisions they make, having to backtrack more or less to day 1. That can happen, or back into a job or whatever.
And these negative days are part of the process too. So, we talk about this all the time on this show, which is basically like, instead of just working a job where you're working to basically get paid, work somewhere where you can work to learn.
Yeah.
And that's your negative days. So it's like, okay, I want to learn how to be an expert in e-commerce and develop and send out my own products. Day negative 100 is when you started to work for that e-commerce manufacturer, right? And then day 1 is when you start your brand and you sell your first product.
And I want to talk about this. The reason I keep coming back to the 1,000-day principle and keep discussing it with people is that when you read books about how to build wealth, and I'll say, like, the difference between rich and wealthy is, like, wealthy is rich on your own terms, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So when you read these books, and I've read pretty much everything with rich in the title, they talk about mindset all the time. Mindset. And they talk about strategies all the time. But they almost never talk about time.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a critical element, because there is no value in money if there is no time to have it. And if there is no, if you can't figure out how much time it's going to take you to make certain kinds of money, then it's very difficult to make a judgment about whether or not that strategy is for you. So for example, like, one genre of book that is good with time are investing books, because they say, well, if you take $100,000 and you put it in the market in 1970, by today's date, it would have been worth this much. So investing books crush when it comes to time. Entrepreneurship books are like, think and grow rich. You're going to be rich. And the problem, and I think part of the reason people read like that grind part of the 1,000-day principle, it's like, holy shish, I have been working full time. I'm broke as hell. I have tons of stress. My customers hate me. Like, all this bad things are happening. And I'm on day 400. I'm completely effed. And so knowing these time horizons helps people to say, hey, there's a sunrise here.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there is a pattern that exists in the world that is tough to pin down, but it does exist. And we got to find something to trust. And I think the reason people migrate to things like jobs and careers and the stock market and stuff is they say, here's the numbers. Here's how long it's going to take. Work for 40 years, invest for 30 years. And so what we're trying to say is invest for 3 years. And we're going to try to do more here today, which is we're going to try to de-risk this process. Almost like an argument or a polemic for those that are curious about how to make wealth on their own terms. We're going to talk about 9 ways to de-risk this path. And then hopefully we can garner some from the audience, either from the link below. And by the way, you can do it anonymously or by the chat.
Mitko asks, quick note here. What do you call the period before the 1,000 days when you're gaining the skills to launch, when you're using house money to level up to day 1?
The yearning.
The yearning.
Well, that's just from the stupid article, but
the BS days before sale.
Before sale, yes, yeah. This we call it, when you go to that first sale day, we call that exit velocity. And how to decide what your exit velocity could be so many different things. If you have tons of money and resources and experience, if you ran somebody else's business, for example, successfully, your exit velocity is going to be like here. I mean, that person might invest in you. You're going to already have all the know-how. Whereas what a lot of people do is they read the 4-Hour Work Week or How to Get Rich by Felix Dennis, whatever, and they say, ooh, that's my secret desire. I really want to get rich. So what I'm going to do is like finish up my job quick. I'm going to lock myself in the woodshed and I'm going to type up ways to make money online. It's like, that is like the worst exit velocity of all time. Like, you are equipped with basically a desire and a couple books that you read plus some time. Like, that's not going to cut it. For a lot of y'all that got through the 1,000 days, you know, it was like this weird mix of like clients and freelance works and crazy deals and like investors that like didn't work out and employees that screwed you over and like that one weird thing you won't mention. And like, it often takes a lot more tenacity than just like, I'm going to drink coffee and type on my laptop.
Do you remember in the 80s and 90s when it was,
sorry, I'm talking about exit velocity.
Exit velocity. Do you remember in the 80s and 90s when it was real popular to put yourself in a cannon and like shoot the stuntman into the net?
I have no idea why this fell out of favor.
I don't know. It was like,
I would show up for that.
Some of the greatest times in televisions, it was usually at like a monster truck rally, right? Mm-hmm. This is generally like the time when this happened, but it got me thinking about this exit velocity thing. Like, you know, the guy just like pops out and falls to the ground. That's a bad scenario. You got to make it into the lake.
Yeah,
know?
And it's something that really we should define more. Like, what would be like minimum viable exit velocity? If you guys have thoughts on that. Personally, you know, and this is something that David, by the way, founded Greenback Tax Services, which is one of my grail, like, dynamite circle businesses. Like, I always look to Greenback Tax Services and think, what a cool business, what an awesome business. And what Dave and Carrie always said to me, the founders of that business, was like, look, we wanted to quit our jobs in London. We had these fancy jobs and stuff, but that experience was invaluable to running Greenback. And I think the same of our experience when we used to work together in a company. We were running a company that had 35 employees. We had multi-million dollars in sales. We had a bigger product line, in fact, than we ever had. So we were managing all these suppliers and products and stuff. And man, we were learning on OPM, OPP.
Other people's money.
Yeah, other people's platforms. And like we always talk about, part of the reason the time element is so important is that you can't read 4-Hour Work Week and then be an entrepreneur, because entrepreneurship is a know-how. Same way you can't read a video or read a book about riding bikes and then all of a sudden know how to balance on a bike. And unfortunately, entrepreneurship is typically a lot harder than balancing on a bike. That said, it's not that crazy hard. And most of us have done more difficult things in our lives. So what we wanted to do here today is share 9 kind of mindsets that helped us to de-risk this path and sort of got it to the point that entrepreneurship was a no-brainer for us. And this is something that maybe we could share with friends or relatives or people curious about it. Are these legitimate? Are they survivor's bias? Let us know. Here's the thing, like, I'm not a big risk taker. Like, I never resonated with the whole like entrepreneur as the big risk person. I think we take emotional risks, me and you. Mm-hmm. Like, we stick our neck out to like pay people, to fulfill our promises, to like do work on people's behalf. But I'm not like, flying to Africa to shaky plane and like putting $1 million down to open up a mine or something. Like, that's not the kind of risk, mm-hmm. that we've taken on. And frankly, I'm not interested in that kind of risk. But the thing that really inspired me to be an entrepreneur is that it became clear to me after I started making a very good salary that I couldn't afford some of like the most basic things in life. And some of those most basic things were random Wednesdays away from the office. I couldn't, like, the absurdity of being a supposedly high valued, high paid employee versus like not being able to take Wednesday off whenever I want without being punished was absurd to me. And then the idea that no matter how much money I made, I would never in those circumstances be able to spend many months in a foreign country. To me, the idea of being a free person in a foreign country and just exploring the world was so far away from any reality that I could imagine. In the beginning, I was like, yeah, that's life. That's how working at a job is. And when I started to find things like this on the internet, I realized, wait a second.
This ain't right.
That ain't life. That's like a basic thing. Like going somewhere else and being there, that's as old as time. Like I should be able to do that. But somehow like I've ceded this right, except for 2 weeks a year. 2 weeks a year, I'm
you
cool.
got to feel guilty about that second week.
Because
the first week, you don't have to feel too guilty about it. But America, got to feel guilty about that second week, especially if they're next to each other. I mean, it's one thing if you take Christmas off a week and then a week in the summer. If you take both those weeks off next to each other in America, people will lose their minds, man.
It was these sort of emotional things that it wasn't like a spreadsheet that convinced me to go down my 1,000 days. Mm-hmm. It was like these emotional things. So I want to share some of these emotional things.
Sure.
And we're going to get into the list of 9 right now. So the first one was this. It was considering the relative value of the money you're earning. And so say you're making 6 figures at a job. Now, in order to get that money, you have to add in the time element to get the relativity. And then you also have to sprinkle in a little bit of mobility. So if you have a job that's relatively leveraged, that lets you live anywhere and pays you reasonably well, that money, in my mind, is a lot different than money that you have to drive to an office and wear a nice shirt, whatever.
Yep.
Because that's going to cost you more to get that, assuming all things else being equal.
All money is not created equal.
Exactly. And so this actually made it very de-risked to quit my job because in my case, when I considered money we were earning from our e-commerce store versus salary, I thought it was about a 5x factor for me. So the moment that Ian called me up and said, hey man, I think I can pay you $800 a month, I was like, that's basically like making 50 grand a year or whatever. I'm in, you know? And it made it a easier decision to jump into the entrepreneurial ship because I had that relative value of wealth.
And there were some other things at play. This is a real important one, which is you didn't have debt. So you were able to actually make $800 a month. I mean, that's super important. Is like you figured out a baseline where you don't have to earn a lot of money to
I actually
be able to
did
survive.
have debt.
You had debt, but you didn't have to service it. So.
That's right. Yes, I did have, because I remember paying off my debt but it wasn't like some big black cloud in my life or whatever. Yeah.
But my point is you can't afford to make $800 a month if you got a car payment, a house payment, crushing debt, all these things. So there's something that has to happen before you can get yourself in a position where you can make basically $0, which is you have to eliminate your debt.
Change your name. You fly to Thailand. All right. Number 2 way that we de-risked the 1,000 days is that we moved somewhere fun, cheap, and relevant. So all of a sudden, like if you're in the career script, it becomes this like obvious thing that you're going to make an expensive move, that you're going to get in a U-Haul, bring the whole family, you're going to buy a house in relative quick order, which is like the biggest thing in your life. You're going to pull together a new wardrobe, and you're going to do this all in the service of a job that you've never actually spent a day working in. You've just interviewed there. And this is somehow considered not risky. This is something that Americans do every day. Like this is as average as normal, where as an entrepreneur or an apprentice or a WFAer, you can do precisely the opposite. So you can move somewhere simple. You can move somewhere cheap. You can move somewhere where people do your laundry. You can move somewhere where you just can comfortably live on less and put all of that energy into your 1,000 days. You don't want to like squander one of those 1,000 days doing laundry, because then all of a sudden it's going to have to be 1,001. You don't want to be in that situation.
This is kind of the history of digital nomadism, and it's actually read an article this morning. Was this in a Wall Street Journal or something? What was this?
I forget.
Okay, somebody wrote an article today. It was basically like
About drop shippers.
It was about drop shippers. Yeah, it's worth reading. It was also about how the people teaching drop shipping might be making more than the actual drop shippers.
The practitioner to preach ratio is suspect.
Yes. But this is essentially what we did back in the day, and here's the reason why we did it. Is Dan had a yearning to travel, and I hadn't ever traveled before we started this business, so I didn't know. I was like, "Well, this isn't Bethany Beach. What else is there in the world?" But Dan had actually gone somewhere. He'd actually seen some things, and so then I started to travel after Dan. But the point is this: is that basically Dan left America in search of development and SEO. Cheaper than we could do it in California. We got a quote from some guy in California to develop our stuff. It was like $100,000 or whatever it was. We're like, how are we ever going to compete in this market? How are we ever going to crush our competition if we can't even afford to pay this guy $100,000? And it was like, wait, I heard in Asia that there's some low development costs there. I heard in Asia that I can live on the cheap very well for $500 a month. And it was like, oh, location arbitrage, right? Here's a reason to go to Asia. Here's a reason that makes sense for you personally and for the business. And so that's how this location independent digital nomad thing started out. It's turned into something completely different now, I think.
It can be whatever you make it. And the whole point is like, you get to go on an adventure.
You do.
You don't have to move to St. Louis and identify a home that's within reasonable price and then start going to this. You can go wherever the hell you want so long as it's relevant. There's amazing people there that can support you in your business. Yep. There could be clients there. There could be a simple and quiet life, whatever that is to you. I think that's one way to de-risk and make this whole thing fun. Okay, number 3.
It was mentioned that it was Bethany Beach represent. It was in Wired magazine. Yeah, I think it was Wired UK. Thank you.
It's worth a read. Okay, why not get paid to learn? Number 3. So again, we're making arguments to maybe our former selves, our future selves, our family and colleagues. We have the statement, we say, work to learn, not to earn. Because eventually, look, no job is that lucrative that it's going to make all the wealth difference. There are some careers, we'll get into job, career, but whatever. Of course, if you have an exception, you have one, but 9 out of 10 times, it's like, even if someone slaps $175,000 a year in front of you, typically what you got to do to upkeep that and the amount of savings pressure, and it typically doesn't end in some big wealth event. And often the dollars that you earn are not on your own terms. So why not flip the whole thing around and say, forget about all that. I will one day make my wealth through an asset that I own. So while I work for people, why don't I get paid to learn? Which is so cool, because if you work for a big company, you have to risk a bunch of your dollars to either move to corporate headquarters or to go get your MBA or to do whatever. And then hope that someone's going to value that piece of paper and then notch up your salary just so much that you can pay it all back in 5 or 6 years. This is a big amount of risk. In entrepreneurship, we flip the whole thing upside down. We take a tropical MBA and we say, I'm going to have some mofo pay me so that I can learn about running their business. That's an apprenticeship. That's just a good job. That's a job where you're allowed to be at the table. And here's the cool part. This cash flowed education is actually critical. So you can't go out and buy a course and learn how to be an entrepreneur. Sorry. If you want to spend $3,000 or $4,000 to go to a course, that's probably not going to work out for you, because what you really need is to get paid the whole way along so that you can understand that your work and your know-how contributes to the real success of an enterprise or to an individual or to a partner. And when that happens, that's the feedback you need to get that exit velocity.
Yep.
And so why not get paid to learn? Forget about these advanced degrees, forget about these workshops and all this BS everybody's doing. Just get paid to be an apprentice or a number one right-hand person of a successful entrepreneur.
Just say one other thing related to that, Dan. I think a lot of people are probably in a situation where they're earning a lot of money, 6 figures, and they're not learning anything. But they've found themselves in a position where it's like, hey, I'm comfortable here. I only have to work 2 or 3 hours a day. I make a bunch of money. That's a golden handcuff situation. That's a tough situation for a lot of people to walk away from. But if you're sitting in that situation, you start asking yourselves these fundamental questions about why am I not free? Why can't I go on these vacations?
Hold up a second. You make $100,000 a year working 2 to 3 hours a day?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Going to an office?
Oh yeah.
Huh.
Oh yeah.
You can't close that door and do a little side?
That's my point. Which is if you got a situation like that you're in, my advice would be,
first off,
close that door.
Well done.
Yeah. Close that door.
All right. How about number 4? Again, we're making an argument as to why you ought to go down these 1,000 days, blindfold yourself, drink the Kool-Aid, and just go. You could work with a partner. How about this? What if instead of having to play office politics for the next 10 years in order to make your dash, you got to partner up with a life partner, a business partner, a team, someone that believes in what you're doing, customers that believe in what you're doing. It's kind of, honestly, I know it's not a spreadsheet thing, but the fact that we got to like do this together and like, you know, drive around at night and go to 7-Eleven and drink Monster Energies and then do an extra 2 hours of work. Like, who gets to do that? I mean, that's a cool thing. It's being a part of a team. Certain jobs have this element. The sorts of jobs I was in really didn't. They had this fake team stuff where like, it was obvious like everyone was just trying to maintain their job. And that's why we were buying into the team concept. Like we weren't really into what we were doing. It's lame. It's much cooler to live this way, I think. Okay.
Frank Jones, little story. A friend shared how amazing it was to have his job pay for his business trip to China from the USA. He was there for 1 week and away from his wife during their anniversary. I would have quit.
That's solid.
It's a good point.
Yeah.
And then Frank Jones also mentions, what's up, Frank? Greenville, North Carolina, and other small towns in the USA offer similar options to minimizing costs. They're not as exotic as Thailand, but there are other perks. 100% agree. If you don't want to go to Thailand, don't go to Thailand. There was legitimate reasons for our business that it made sense to go there and find low-cost development work.
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense for everybody. A lot of people, they can baseline in other places, but the idea of baselining is basically cutting your expenses as low as possible so you can have as long of a runway as possible to start your business. Doesn't matter if it's in Thailand or Greenville.
Yeah, shout out. I mean, there's a couple design reasons. Like one of the reasons to go to Thailand is like your tax burden goes down.
Yep.
Another is that it's easy to get like highly skilled expats to work because it's like a desirable location. It's similar like, you know, in California, you can pay people a little bit less because people want to live in California. Shout out to Greenville, North Carolina. I was hanging around Greenville, South Carolina last couple years ago, just peeking around, seeing what's going on.
We both used to live in the South.
Yeah, absolutely. Wonderful spot.
+1, +2 for Puerto Rico too in tax breaks. I've been to Puerto Rico. I don't quite get it. I think I need to go back there again. But yeah,
I've heard a lot of people say stuff like that. Like it's tough. It takes a while to get used to living there.
Yeah, but there's like some loophole basically there where your tax burden is much less than it would be if you're living in the continental United States.
All right, so we're on to point number 5 of de-risking, and again, looking for you guys to add to this list. Do you really need a high salary to be happy?
Yes.
For me, you know, is this kind of? I mean, sometimes. One of the things you brought up that was so interesting is if you start asking these questions, you might have a whole host of other questions on your plate. Like, where am I going to live? What am I going to do with all my time? Like that can become a burden if you just like the job, high salary, do what the boss says, live near the office. Not to say that like life isn't complicated or whatever, but like it's a big part of your life. And I think that's kind of the whole like sort of carpe diem thing going on here. And part of what I find that ultimately at the end of the day, existentially, entrepreneurship didn't feel risky because there wasn't anything in front of me that felt truly like soulful, like that was de-risked from a soul perspective. Like, really, I'm going to do this for the rest of my life? Like just for a high salary?
So let's talk about this high salary thing. Cause I said yes, but it was kind of a joke. I think both you and I have lived high on the hog, and we've also lived low on the totem. And I think one of the advantages to doing both and everywhere in that range is that you feel comfortable, kind of anywhere in that range. So if you have to go lose it all, or if you have to go back to nothing, I feel relatively comfortable with that. Would it not be my favorite? Probably. I'd prefer to have a couple things, you know. But like we said before, this money that you earn comes at a cost, right? Like there is an actual cost to you earning $175,000 at a job.
Yeah.
And that cost a lot of times is your time.
Here's the thing. There are like status hierarchies in all societies. Like there's status hierarchies between Ian and myself. Like when he showed up with that t-shirt today, I thought, this MFer has so much more status than me right now. I need that t-shirt. So now I'm going to go spend $15 or call up your mom and say, I got to get that t-shirt. The idea is that you got to choose your status hierarchies wisely. So one of the things that hilariously we did together is you convinced me that I could not buy a car that I couldn't afford. So I drove around San Diego, California, like car capital, in a $400 hoopty for weeks. And it was almost like, I don't know, sometimes when people do like fear exercises, like on these entrepreneurship books, I'm like, roll my eyes just a little bit, but there's really something to it too, which is like, is that if that's what you give a shit about, then you might get caught up in that game where, hey, look, it costs $65,000 to drive a car that mildly impresses 5 people that don't care about you.
Yeah.
So if that's the game you want to play, 65 grand takes anybody a long time to make.
Mm-hmm.
Choose your status hierarchies wisely. And yeah, that's the whole idea here is like, what are you needing all this money for, and what are you signing up for that are unintended consequences of those responsibilities?
Well, I think legitimately people want things, and that's okay. I don't think that you should shy away from that.
For sure.
Freddie says, I think past 100K is diminishing returns, or perhaps 200K if you have a family in an expensive city. I'll say this. If you make $150,000 at a job, it's infinitely harder to make $250,000. That's the first thing, is that you do not actually probably have the ability to make $250,000 if you're making $150. It just doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
If you're a business owner, there's a good chance that you will be in control of making $150 to $250, depending on what you do, who you hire, the products that you sell. That being said, if you make $150,000 at a job, the script is there. The script has been written. You will take this type of vacation. You will hang out with these types of people. You will be able to afford this type of apartment in New York City or wherever you live. It is very clear and transparent, in America especially, what $150,000 gets you. I think if you look at that and you're okay with that, and that's everything that you've ever wanted, and you don't predict in the next 10 years that you will want more, opt into that, because in a lot of ways it is a lot easier than this entrepreneurial script. There's a lot of unknowns.
You brought us to our point number 6, boss man. Incomes and saving schemes typical of inflexible careers are often very fragile. So if I can paraphrase what you're saying, one event from an illness to a home restoration to an expensive college choice by an unruly son, for example, could often undermine decades of careful financial management. There's simply not a lot of margin in a lot of this stuff. And that's what I love about the ability to go down to the $400 car and up to the $250,000 net profit, and just be flexible the whole time.
Yep.
That's the promise. It's not easy, but it's also not easy to be riding a fragile system that you're not in control of and that you have very little flexibility with. All right. So number 7, let's start to get through some of these, boss man.
Yep.
What's more powerful in your resume? So the dreaded resume gap.
Oh God, I hate that.
The dreaded resume gap is a real risk in people's hearts, but things are changing. And what's more powerful on your resume? A 3-year period working at a company. So in other words, you're sort of asserting like 2007, 2009, I worked at this place. Or a clear knowledge of how you get the job done by sharing projects that you actually led. After walking the walk, you will be more hireable. I ask this question to entrepreneurs all the time, and it's universal. People feel more hireable. And if you're not, you're doing something wrong. And people will say, well, in my career path, if I went out and did something on my own that I believed in or whatever, like it would pretty much disqualify me. And it's like, I get that. That's fair. That's real. But part of me is thinking, as the entrepreneur, of course, like, you want to work for people that don't appreciate like you building something on your own. And why not work for people that appreciate the things that you appreciate? Because
a couple things here. I've heard so many of these stories. The dreaded resume gap. Someone tried to tell me one time that, and they're an engineer. Somebody tried to tell me if they had a resume gap, they wouldn't get hired. You know how much has like changed in the field of engineering in the last like 30 years? Like, not a lot. That's why they still read the same textbooks at school. That's why they say it's
let me tell you,
fundamental physics.
let me
Okay?
tell you about someone who's engineer first versus whiteout first, or whiteout. I gave away my joke versus entrepreneurial first, because the engineer is thinking, "Oh, I spent 3 years, I'm all fucked." As an entrepreneur, I'm thinking, "Little whiteout will help that." I think I could, a couple phone calls and some whiteout, and I think you could sort out a couple years on your resume.
So-
I mean, I'm not saying to lie, but I am saying, lie if the other person's a dick about it.
there are very few fields in my mind that you can't take 3 years off if you're a halfway decent person and re-educate yourself on what has changed in the market. Okay,
Yeah.
it's just total bullshit that you can't get back up to speed. I'll just tell this other story, Dan, and then we can get moving. Which is basically my partner. She's an engineer also, and when we got ready to leave for Vietnam, there was a bunch of the older dudes in the office, and she kind of told them what she was doing, and she had some of these same misgivings. She was like, I'm going to create this revenue or this resume gap, and she told them, and they were like, get the hell out of here as fast as you can. I cannot believe that I sat in this office for 30 years and did not see the rest of the world. So if the person across the table from you is looking at your resume and they see this resume gap and they think like, they're in one of two camps. They're either like, I really wish I did that, I'm jealous, or I can't believe that you did that. And you don't want to work for the person that says they can't believe you did that. You just don't.
Yeah. So many stories. Yeah. I gotta restrain myself.
You gotta hydrate too, by the way. This is happy hour. I feel like I've been doing all the drinking here. There you go.
I got 2 more points. Then we're gonna toss it over to you guys.
Okay.
If you agree or disagree or have nuance to add to the 1,000-day principle, click that link below. We'd appreciate your thoughts. We're generally going to engage on them and like write some blog posts about it. So we appreciate it. Okay. So the last 2, number 1, build an incredible network. How this compounds. So those Wednesdays when your network was essentially who's at your office, who are you compelled to speak with, and who's your dentist that you get to go to twice a year. That was your network. Now, all of a sudden you freed up your time. You own your own asset. You have something legitimate to talk to. Also, you're a player. Whether or not you own an asset that you only work for, or whether or not you have 30 employees, people speak to people who are in control of their own destiny much differently than they speak to people who are just following directions. Because now all of a sudden, when you talk to a player, you can get something done. Now, you know that too. So that's how you can employ all this free time, which is going around and building an incredible network. It's very difficult to do when you're going to jobby job business conferences. I didn't have a network before we started doing this. Mm-hmm. And the final point is make lifelong memories you can be proud of. And I don't know. It's like, here's the thing. You're trying to de-risk this whole thing. What's the worst that can happen? Oh, you like moved to a foreign country, started a business with your best friend, you created this enormous, ghastly resume gap. You learned a bunch of new skills and you failed at it. And like, so what? It didn't work out. Now you like have a sense of confidence in yourself. You can do anything else. It seems to me like at the end of the day, I think that really is what got me out the door the most, which is like, I'm not proud of what I'm doing. I don't want to just do random things and like act like I'm excited about them so that I get that paycheck that's underwhelming anyway, and that doesn't get me the things I really want in life, which is to do something cool with my friends, to travel to foreign countries, to reflect about it, to write about it, to read about it. Mm-hmm. I mean, when I was at a job, I wanted to close my office door the whole time and read about business, about travel, because that's what I wanted to do, And so why not just get on with it and do what you want to do and figure out a way to be enterprising about it? That's entrepreneurship. And if you can do it for 3 years, you might be able to replace that salary with a venture of your own. That's the 1,000-day principle.
Take another drink. Everybody take a drink.
That's it.
The final thoughts for me on this 3-year thing. The older I get, the shorter 3 years actually is. I mean, if you told me, when you're 12 and you got to wait 3 years to get your learner's permit, it's like, I can't believe how the time is moving so slow. When you're in your 30s and all of a sudden you're almost in your 40s, like, wow, that really moved fast. So I think that there's something to be said. If you're a little bit older and you're looking down, giving up what you already have, it's a lot different proposition than starting from maybe not having a lot, which is where we started. So I recognize the fact that it's a lot harder. If you're already in a career, you already have sunk costs, right? You already have this lifestyle, and now you got to like back away from it. That's a hard proposition. But if you're staring down university, right, and you're staring down $20,000 a year for no clear ROI after that, this 3 years is looking pretty good. Yeah. Go work for somebody that's going to pay me to learn.
Yeah, I'm going to get paid.
Start my own company. Maybe I fail, maybe I don't. But then guess what? I got some kind of entrepreneurial skill set. I was relating this to the Entrepreneur Mobile, which we talk a lot about. And that's the art of buying fully depreciated cheap cars, which I love doing. And here's the idea is I buy and sell a lot of cars, okay? Most people, they buy like 5 cars or something like that. Is there value in learning the skill of buying a good car for as low as possible that's fully depreciated if you only buy 5 cars? Yeah. Is there more value in somebody like me that maybe does 100? Yes, there's much more. But the idea here is this skill set is going to stick with you for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
It is something that doesn't go away. And like you said,
it doesn't go away like jobs.
Those times with your partner, those vacations, all the fun you had is going to stick with you too. So, minimize your downside, but certainly have a good time when you're doing it.
Yep. A lot of survivorship bias in my mind.
For sure.
I could imagine like if everything we had done had blown up and say I didn't have any retirement savings and I'm sitting here at 40 years old trying to figure out like what to do with the rest of my life. The first thing that comes to my mind is I feel extremely well equipped to start a career, to find a business partner, to make some money online, or to even go have a traditional job, even to have a good attitude and maybe a more blue collar job. I just feel like I've seen it all through the past decade and a half. I feel extremely confident in how to interact with people, how to create value and all that. So in a way that the world didn't feel so simple to me when I was working in a career and there was so many vague political forces that ultimately decided what my future looked like. It just doesn't feel like that anymore. It's part of the simplicity and the beauty of things like one true client or 10 true clients or 100 true fans or whatever your favorite number and designation is that you don't need to get on board with a lot of people. You just need to find enough.
Couple comments, and you guys are welcome to bring in your own here. Bring in more, rather. Miko blowing up the sidebar here.
What up?
The only issue is environment. I want to be in a place with a good community of entrepreneurs.
Miko said this?
Yeah. So I'll try and answer this. And Dan, I'm sure you're going to have some thoughts on this, but we solved this problem for ourselves in a lot of ways, right? And Dan and I felt the same way. So we started showing up to these meetups, and there was nobody like us. It was real estate agents and stuff. We said, these people aren't entrepreneurs. So what do? We created the Dynamite Circle, which is where all of our buddies hang out. And that's the hack for us, basically, is that we have the same problem. You go to Barcelona, all of a sudden you don't have a community. We have the Dynamite Circle there.
Okay, but honestly, that's an extension of things we were doing way, way before we started the Dynamite Circle.
Which was reaching out to other entrepreneurs.
Yeah, and also like it's a litmus test. Like, what kind of friends are you attracting? I mean, you ought to be able to like, I don't know, like exhaust any scene. So the ambiance of entrepreneurs in the air is a nice thing, but there's a whole nother thing, which is like, who are your actual friends? Who are the people that you call up on a weekly basis to swap notes and stuff? You don't need any kind of special group or whatever to do that. Like, you need to have those people. And I don't know, like that, I don't know the skill set there, but maybe it's just a desire. And what I would say is like high level people, and high level people, it has nothing to do with whether you have $1 million business, a $10 million business, or whether you're just starting out. It has everything to do with you have excellent ego control. You aren't needy or thirsty. You are an excellent and observant communicator and listener. And you are no freaking bullshit. And 9 out of 10 high performers, people that are really interesting, have those things in common, is that they're straight shooters. They're transparent. They're open. They're honest.
Yeah.
They're not playing strange games all the time that you see a lot with people that are really thirsty and needy. And so I think that, you know, I guess be careful if your desire is so strong to like network with successful people. Realize that that thirst itself could prevent you from doing so.
Well, I think what Frank might have been alluding to is a little bit more simple. Maybe I'm wrong here, but just any sense of community when you're not in a place that you're familiar with, where your friends are. And I think my answer to that was the Dynamite Circle, which is a community that brings people together in a lot of different locations around the world. The first time I went to China for 30 days, lived there to do some sourcing. And I was immediately alone because this was like back in the old days when you just didn't see another Westerner. I mean, for a long time necessarily, but when you
those are going to be the new days pretty soon.
Yeah, when you bumped into them though, you're like, oh shit, what are you doing here? It was like, well, what are you doing here? And like instantly it was some interesting things that were going on, and instantly there was a bond. And you still find this when you're traveling around, which is like, we're not supposed to be here, but we're here. What are you doing?
Certainly one of the top 10 arguments for being an expat is you might not meet all the best people in the world, but certainly all the normies have been flushed.
Yeah.
So that's cool.
Awesome. Mike Stankovich says +1 for not needy or thirsty. If there's anything that will put off high level people, it's being needy. I agree.
Yeah. I mean, you have to be, you know, especially sensitive to, you know, a lot of us are watching this like Michael Jordan documentary or whatever.
Yeah.
Like you cannot be the person that breaks down and asks for the autograph. You just cannot. You have to be done with that for the rest of your life if you want to hang out with high performers. It's going to take a long, long time to build trust with people that have a lot going on, and it can take years. And that's why we always say, whatever, it's your no asshole policy or trust your instincts, but it has to be with people that, you know, you genuinely like. And it's a good litmus test too, to see if they genuinely like you. And if the answer is no, I keep putting these people off for whatever reason, that's like probably some pretty, you know, productive space there. Or, you know, focus on your strengths, focus on the types of people you do connect with versus keep hoping that, you know, you're going to be able to hang out with these people that maybe you're making up in your mind like aren't actually your people.
Yeah.
Maybe they're not.
There's conversation going over in the comments now about just like income levels. And I think one of the things that Mike Stankovich brought up, and he's saying that he's a contractor. I'm running at 250-ish per year. I assume that's 1,000, which is a lot. But that's as a contractor. If you go to W-2, most companies will try and knock you back to the 100s. I think this is actually kind of an interesting concept, maybe worth exploring here, which is basically what Mike's done is like he's found a way to be a contractor versus an employee. And his basic idea here is like if you're an employee, they're going to try and keep you in line with whatever their employment structure is basically in that company. And these things really exist. You know, if you're not the highest performer and the CEO makes $250K, forget about making $250K probably. But if you're a contractor and you have a bunch of different clients, it's very possible to make $250K.
Sure.
And maybe not even from just one organization.
I'll tell you what, it takes a long time to go through the 1,000-day principle with the small asset and get to the point where you're making $250,000 a year. And that's why at the beginning of Felix Dennis's wonderful book, How to Get Rich, he says, if you make $250,000 a year, whether you're a contractor, whether you have a job, you're probably never going to do this.
Yeah.
And that was basically back to the beginning of the episode. That was what David McKeegan said to me. Because, you know, he came from a job where there was a bunch of bankers and they were all making a lot of money. And he said, look, like all these people I hung out with in London or whatever, they're not going to go be poor for 3 years. And by the way, be poor with some question marks. A lot of people go on a 1,000-day journey and they just don't ever get to the 1,000 days. And
yeah.
And I'll tell you what, I think if I'm thinking like the biggest misconception is like you said, like, oh, things are long and short. When you're in the middle of your 1,000 days, it feels long because it's hard. It's hard not making money. It's hard not having the answers. It's hard trying to figure out hacks and shortcuts and having somebody not pay you and having that be a big deal and having your Filipino VA, you know, fall into a typhoon or something and your work's not getting done. And it's just all hard. And it feels like a long, long time to figure out. It feels uncertain. And so I think that's the reason if you can go out and make $250,000 a year, like, I mean, in some ways, like that's one of the biggest counter arguments to this whole thing.
Well, and here's the other reality of making $250,000 a year. In our previous business, we could have done it a lot sooner, like years sooner than we actually did it at. And here's the reasons: because we continuously reinvested in the company to build a true platform that was an asset that we were ultimately able to sell. So
why relative wealth matters.
Exactly.
And it matters. Like you could, if you really wanted to get like spreadsheety about it, you could talk about, the amount of free cash flow you're pulling relative to like asset size and value. And, in our case, you can like own an asset and then strip it of all its net profit every year, or you can reinvest a lot of what you'd otherwise earn into this cash machine and build the asset value. So there's like a lot of calculations you can do in figuring out what your relative wealth was. But ours was always like, we'd rather make, provided we had growth and reasonable projects to put people on, we were always taking half a pay cut. Like instead of half of the money we could have made, we put it right back into the business. And for us, it was always just like the obvious thing to do because of everything we talked about today.
Yeah. There's a bunch of talk about autographs. I guess you mentioned something about autographs.
You cannot ask for Michael Jordan's autograph.
Michael Jordan, yeah. It was a French guy. He asked for the autograph, and Michael was like, dude, you're standing right next to me.
But you know what the worst part about that whole thing, and I don't know what happened to that French guy, but I got to wonder, how did he live with himself? Well, he was the guy who asked, and he had to walk out of there, and he has to know that about himself for the rest of his life. So I hope he's doing well.
Alan Walton says, I hopped in line to meet a Victoria's Secret model who was giving away autographs at the store. 100% worth it. I believe you. Oh, man. Swearwork says, I've been doing my own thing so long, I can't even imagine having a job. I would do almost anything to not work for somebody else. Hey, here's the thing, Swearworks. That's a pretty funny name. I feel the same way. And here's a thought experiment for everybody. What is the number for you that you would go and have a job? Meaning you got to go to the office 50 weeks out of the year. You got to have your ass in your chair.
Like a job that you
you would excel at.
That you have to go up an octave. That you like that job, not go be the pit crew of a race car team, or hey Dan, why don't you manage Peter Sagan's Instagram account or something? I would do it for almost nothing. Call me Peter.
Job. Okay.
I like a job.
Yeah. What's your number?
That you kind of have to sit around and talk about the virtues of from time to time.
Yeah.
I like it. It's okay. By the way, we talk about our businesses the same way, so it's not necessarily all green on the other side of the fence.
No, I just think it's a worthwhile experiment because we might get to that point. Everybody might get to that point.
Sure.
So it's a worthwhile question to be asking yourself what that number is.
Yeah. Might be giving Mike a call after this. See if he wants to hire me as a subcontractor.
Back to the topic of network. Frank Jones says, I like to look for groups on the local version of Meetup, Craigslist, Eventbrite, Couchsurfing, Chamber of Commerce, Lions, Rotary Club. Final thought here for me on these networks and these communities is like most of the time they do not exist in the form that you actually need, like in your heart. Like the things that you need, a lot of times they don't exist. I mean, you might show up and like find somebody you really connect with. I think that's rare. It happens. It's happened to me. A lot of times you have to create these groups. You got to put your flag in the sand, whatever that is, Frank, and you got to say like, hey man, this is what I'm into. And then people come.
Yeah, even within those groups, that's a really great way. Like that's how me and you both use DC. That's how a lot of DC members use it.
Yep.
That's how cycling works, golf, all these kinds of things. Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting, like what kind of connection. It is nice. I'll tell you this about Austin, Texas. So did Mitko ask about where to live, or Frank? I can't remember. But one of the cool things about here in Austin, Texas, and I haven't quite done this anywhere else in the U.S. yet, although I haven't been to a lot of places. Typically, when people ask me what I do, I say something like, I own businesses online, or sometimes if I'm in a really kind of place that's not really hip to the internet, I'll say like, I own an e-commerce store, something like that, just to make it as simple as possible.
I do not agree with this.
What should I say?
We talked about it.
What should I say?
I think here's the problem with this approach is I don't think you're lying to people, but I think it's on them to understand what it is. So if you go to them and you say, I'm a podcaster.
This is spoken like a guy who lives in Austin, Texas.
And their mind explodes.
You know what?
Whose fault is that they don't know what a podcast is?
This is a guy who lives in an ivory tower. He eats vegan food for lunch. You go to the breakfast place and they have hummus options.
Here's the thing. You don't want them to feel uncomfortable, so you'll take that burden off them.
No.
Their poor mind can't
It's not
equate the podcast thing.
It has nothing to do with social anxiety. It's everything to do with the conversation goes on for too long and like always ends up somewhere not productive where they're totally uninterested. So by giving them something that's like, this is like, by the way, this is the question that everyone asks each other in America. You rock up to the golf course. What do you guys do? What do you guys do? And if you're in most places in America and you say something like, I do what we do, forget it. Forget it. That conversation is toast. But in Austin, Texas, what I love about it is I just say, I'm a podcaster.
They get it.
And everybody gets it. So now I can try it. I can try it in the Southeast to say I'm a podcaster, but what is that? Oh, it's kind of like one of these, oh, that's the most typical place it ends, you know, like, okay, let's just drop it. So I figure if I at least say e-commerce, then it's something that might go somewhere. All right. End of it. Maybe I should just say podcaster.
I said my piece.
Oh. All right. Is that the end of the live? This has been a wonderful happy hour. We appreciate you guys joining us. If you had a good time, we can do it next Friday as well. Ian and I have been doing the Podshop daily, and then we went to once a week this week. And the reality is we did do a ton of work. And I think work that ultimately will be a benefit to the podcast listenership. So that'll be good. So we'll do another one next week. And the final thing is, if you do have some insight into the 1,000-day principle that you think we should touch on, click the link below, drop us an email. We're genuinely curious, and we do want to start writing a little bit more about this idea and see what we can do at the blog and about inspiring other people to join up in this crazy journey.
Freddie says, let's do the next one on Zoom so we can see everybody's face.
Cool.
We'll think about it.
I like that idea.
Yeah. So far, we've been doing it on YouTube because it's really easy with eCam. But maybe there's some benefit to seeing everybody's face. We will look into that. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us on this Friday afternoon. Cheers.
Ciao.